Well, this is it, guys. This is our last lesson for the week for our reading. So, if you remember, we worked on lots of stories about point of view. So, I want you to recall the two stories that we've read called Here Boy and Quiet. Now, they're told from different narrative points of view. Here Boy is told from the first person point of view, and Quiet is told from the third person point of view. So we're going to look at those, and we're going to figure out an answer to this close reading prompt. It says reread paragraphs 1 to 2 from Here Boy and paragraphs 1 to 3 of Quiet. And then it says, how are the narrative points of view in each text different? Identify at least 3 differences and provide examples of each. So here's our part. It's saying, how are they different? And we need to identify 3 differences and provide examples of each. And then it tells us we want to underline, but I'm going to highlight instead text evidence to answer our questions. So how are the narrative points of view in each different? So let's dive on it. So let's read Here Boy first. At first, I didn't see a dog. There's just a lot of vegetables rolling around on the floor. Tomatoes and onions and green peppers. And there's what seemed like a whole army of Winn-Dixie employees running around waving their arms just the same way as the store manager is waving his. So here's out this part, and we know that she didn't notice this dog right away. If it wasn't told in first person, if it's told in third, the narrator might not thought that'd be important. But since it's first person, she knows that it's going to have an impact on the rest of the story. Paragraph 2. And then the dog came running around the corner. He was a big dog and ugly. And it looked like he was having a really good time. His tongue was hanging out and he was wagging his tail. He skidded to a stop and smiled right at me. I had never before in my life seen a dog smile, but that is what he did. He pulled back his lips and showed me all his teeth. Then he wagged his tail so hard that he knocked some oranges off a display, and they went rolling everywhere, mixing with the tomatoes and onions and green peppers. Well, what I like about this too is that we have this dog, and they're kind of showing us that he's happy, but he's causing this whole commotion. And so if it was third person, I might think, well, what's going on in the dog's head? Does he even realize he's causing this much trouble, or is he just so happy? One of the other things I've noticed is that it uses very basic language. It kind of sounds like a third or fourth grader's talking. He is a big dog. He was ugly. So the language this person's using is much less academic than what we're going to see when we head back over to our other story of Quiet. Quiet uses a whole bunch of language that sounds like proper, almost like it sounds like it should be in a British royal palace. So now let's head on over to learn about our dog Lad. So, to Lad, the real world was bounded by the place. Outside, there's a certain number of miles of land, and there is an uncertain number of people. So here's that language again. If it was like a little kid talking like Opal does in Here Boy, they'd probably just say, I live on a place that's really big. But it's using this formal language, this language that sounds more adult. But the miles were uninspiring, except for a cross-country tramp with the master. And the people were foolish and strange folk, who either stared at him, which always annoyed Lad, or else tried to pat him, which he hated. But the place was the place. Always he had lived on the place. He felt he owned it. It was assuredly his to enjoy, to guard, to patrol from the road on high. It was his world. The denizens of every world must have at least one deity to worship. Lad had one, the master. Ah, I like this part too. They're using some figure of language in here. They're using a type of metaphor. So notice how it says a deity to worship and the master. So deity is like God. They're saying Lad has a god to worship, and it's the master. Now, the master isn't really a god, but he's saying that he's like it. He's his everything. And then it continues, it said, indeed, he had two, the master and the mistress. So it's saying he had 2 people that are like gods to him, 2 people that he worships. And because the dog was strong of soul and chivalric withal, and because the mistress was altogether lovable, Lad placed her altar even above the master's, which was holy as it should have been. So here we have a difference in what? We have a difference in the language they use, that formal and informal, and we also have this difference in Lad's story has figurative language in it. And Here Boy doesn't. It's just descriptions without that figurative language, without metaphors, without similes. So I want you to think going back here, would that have changed if we had different points of view? If we had instead written this in third person, do you think the narrator would have written more with figurative language? Or do you think they would have kept it the same? They probably would have changed it because it wouldn't just be Opal telling the story. It wouldn't just be a little kid anymore. So it could be kind of like an adult describing the story, or they could have made it more like a little kid. We don't know. But right now it's Opal in her third, fourth grade language. Same thing would probably happen over here. If it was told in first person by Lad in our story of Quiet, then it probably would sound more like a dog, like we had in the other story, Dog's Life, where it's just talking about how happy or sad or hungry he is, and it would just focus on those emotions. But since we have that narrator, he's really telling us, hey, this is what's going on around, this is what Lad's thinking, and we're going to find out this is how it's going to affect him. But we're also going to know these other things like the mistress has pneumonia. Now, what you guys are going to do is you guys are going to be answering this question. And if you're stuck, we can kind of answer these right here to get us started. For Quiet and Here Boy, what is the point of view? What is the best point of view for each story? Give specific examples for your reason. And what is the reason for the informal language in Here Boy? So why do we talk with that informal language? And what's the reason for the formal language in Quiet? And would you prefer to change the point of view in these stories? What would be more effective? So if you're stuck on your questions on how to respond, you can answer these. So I'm going to get us started. And remember, I'm answering this question right here. How are the narrative points of view in each text different? So let's start out, and we don't want to just say something boring like one's first and one's third. So let's start out like this. One way in which the narrative points of view are different is that Here Boy is told in first person point of view, period. This point of view uses rather informal language, period. An example is we see Opal describe the dog as he was big and ugly, period. In Quiet, comma, we see the author use formal language, such as uncertain number of people and certain number of miles, period. And so now let's fix that up. And I'm going to drag this over here and make it bigger so we can see it better. And I guess I'm going to have to drag it over here where we have more room. And so there I go. But I only have two examples. So now I may want to include what? I may want to include why one is better than the other, or I can include about that figurative language. So let's talk about that figurative language. In Quiet, comma, the author also uses figurative language, period. He describes the master and mistress as deities or gods, period. Opal doesn't use figurative language in her story because she's a little kid, and that's just normally not how little kids talk, period. And let's fix describes. And then as I was reading it again, I noticed I didn't say in Quiet that they are doing what? I didn't say that it's third person. So I'm going to put that in there just so the reader knows. And I'm going to put quotation marks around the name of my story. We can use quotations or underlines or italics. I'm going to use quotations. And so I want to put in Quiet, we see the author use formal language such as uncertain number of people and certain number of miles in third person point of view. All right, so that is it, guys. I hope your sentence or your paragraph was just as good. I'll see you guys later. Now, guys, we have our commonly confused words. So we have it's and its, through, board, do, die, here, new, no, red, and red. And so what you probably noticed is these are all what? These are all homophones that we've already talked about. They're words that sound the same, but they're spelled differently. They have different meanings. So let's look at this first one. This it's is from the word it is. And so if you're ever unsure of which it's to use, you can have a sentence and just replace with it is and see if that's correct. So let's try this. It's hot outside, period. Its paw is hurt, period. Well, that said it paw or spa is hurt, so let's change that. So now let's check. It's hot outside. I can replace this with it is and see if that makes sense. It is hot outside. Yeah, it does. So that means we had the right one with the apostrophe. Now let's replace this one with it is and see if it makes sense. It is hurt. Yeah. Now let's try and if we had this, because it put spa instead. Its paws hurt. Well, now let's try it with it is and see if that makes sense. It is paws hurt. No, that doesn't. So that means it must be the other it's. So now let's head to our next one, through. This through is like I threw a baseball, but this through is I went through the door. This first board is like a board you karate chop or a board you'd hold up or like a game board. So, but this board is I'm bored with math. It's like you're tired of something. It's not interesting. Now this do is what we use all the time. I want you to do it. This due is like an assignment is due. So this video is due by the end of Friday. And this due is like this wet stuff that we get on the ground when it's really cold outside. So if you've ever noticed the dew on the ground, on the grass, that's what dew is. Now we have die and die. This die over here is what? Well, it's like, oh, I died. I'm losing all my blood. But this dye is like you change the color of your hair. I dye my hair blue for Wolfpack basketball season. Now we have here and here. So remember, this here is like a location. I want you to come over here. But this here is like sound. Do you hear that bell ringing? Now we have new and new. This is new like something you already know, like a fact. I knew you were going to come to my house. But this new is the opposite sign. This is something that's brand new, something that you haven't seen before or something that hasn't been made before. So I got new presents at Christmas. Now we have no and no, which is similar to new and new. It's just this one's past tense. I know what you did last summer. But this no is the opposite of yes. So no, you can't have 12,000 pounds of candy. And our final one is red and red. So our first red is like you should have read 30 minutes yesterday. But this one is our color red. So I just changed it to red. So that's what we have for your homophones. Good luck, guys.